Well, Eric, man, thanks for being with us today. We're going to talk about a lot. We're going to kind of jump around. First, I want to get a little bit about your journey from Silicon Valley into becoming an author, consultant, investor, advisor, and really, what was the genesis from this idea of the lean startup? To really take me back to the days of IMVU and where you spent 18 months building what you would say, and this is not my words, yours, building maybe the wrong product. So maybe walk us through the genesis of where all this came from.
Yeah. So I loved computers from a young age. Okay, so I'm like a software nerd from early childhood,
There you go.
and I was so excited to do a startup in Silicon Valley. I'd done a startup during the dot-com bubble in my dorm room that I hadn't worked out too well. I'd been an intern at Microsoft. Like I'd had some like programming experience, but really like Silicon Valley was like the mecca to me. And like the idea that like Cupertino would turned out to be a real place, like it was like Narnia to me. I like you knew that Apple computers were made in Cupertino, but like you may as well have told me that it was made in Oz. That's how it was to me. And came out to Silicon Valley in the waiting days of the dot-com bubble, the post bubble crash, and got involved with some startups. And basically, everywhere I went, I was taught this very specific theory about how you build startups. Basically, like startups are basically just a shrunken down miniature version of a big company. So they needed departments and executives and planning and business plans and all this stuff. And my first startup in Silicon Valley, I'll never forget this. The business plan was considered a secret, so precious that you had to physically check it out of the company library. You had to go get a physical copy of it. You had to sign out numbered copies and sign them back in because they were so afraid of leaks. Like we were so high on our own supply. It's unbelievable,
Yeah.
in
Oh, yeah.
retrospect. But like that's really how that was, building in stealth mode was considered very important. We spent all this money, had hundreds of employees before we ever had any customers. And I remember sitting with the other engineers, we would do these like play test demos sometimes, for the whole company or for the board of directors would come over and we'd show them the latest product. I remember being like, this is pretty good. Why don't we have some customers try it? And they would look at me like, what? Are you crazy? That's the dumbest idea. You really don't understand how business works, man. You better not say that out loud where anyone can hear you. Like, it's really important to understand what a best practice that was considered to be at the time. So anyway, you will be shocked to hear that after 5 years of stealth R&D, when we finally did launch the product, customers did not exactly rush to embrace it.
Yeah.
And so a bunch of us who were refugees from that company created IMVU, which was like our attempt to do it differently. When I look back on it now, I was in my 20s. I was the youngest person on the team by far of the 5 co-founders. It's kind of a miracle to me that they were willing to let me put my crazy ideas into practice. But they really believed in me and they said, look, yeah, you want to do it differently? Let's make some new mistakes.
Wow.
Let's try it. And so, we really used a lot of these different techniques that now would go by names like minimum viable product and continuous deployment and build,
Yep.
measure, learn, and pivot. We didn't have that vocabulary at the time. It was just Eric's crazy thing, like, whoa,
Yeah,
what,
those are
what,
household
what?
names now, right? Like
Yeah.
MVP is
Now
a
it's so
term.
obvious. And I can even remember, so I was a big believer. I was like, look, we got to use the scientific method, even in business. And people would be like, why? I was like, oh, what? I was like, because we're basically doing astrology here, okay? We're writing down these incantations in a spreadsheet and saying this is going to happen in the future. Let's be scientific. And they're like, well, like what? They'll be like what? I'm like, okay, so we're going to do an A/B split test. And I'll never forget engineers were looking at me and they're like, why? That's like a direct marketing technique from catalogs. What does that have to do with like we were just very, very
What is
countercultural.
wrong with you?
Yeah.
You're a monster.
They were just like, why? Just like they couldn't understand it. And we would have tech due diligence meetings like with VCs. In those days, VCs would employ these like gray-haired veterans of the industry to do tech due diligence. They would come in and be like, okay, kid, this looks all pretty good, but your method of making the software is all crap. So as soon as you take the investment from us, you need to you start doing technical requirements documents, product requirement documents, you need to do this thing. And I was too stupid to understand that my job was to say, yes, sir, I'm sure we'll get right on that as soon as your check clears. Like
That's right.
I
Yeah.
was really stubborn and I'd be like, oh, no, with all respect, would you like to come see the evidence that there's a better way than the thing you learned in your whole career and made you really successful? You will be shocked
Humble.
to learn people were not that interested in seeing the evidence. This has been one of the recurring themes in my life is that people are not very interested in hearing the evidence that the thing that they're ideologically committed to is wrong.
Golly, that's
Right.
goes farther. That goes farther than business. That
That
applies
is
to parenting, politics, religion. And man, wow. Yeah.
everywhere. It is one of the curses of our modern life. So
Or just
anyway,
humanity, right? Yeah.
yeah, this was kind of what ultimately led me to start writing about lean startup, my original plan was not to like write a book and launch a movement. Who can have a plan around a thing like that? It started out as just a set of tools, a set of conceptual tools for me to explain to my own employees why we do things the way we do them because they did not understand. Even the ones who would look at the evidence would come to me and be like, I see that this works, but I don't understand why. And the truth was, I didn't understand why either. It just seemed right to me. I was like, well, I don't have to explain the scientific method, do I?
Yeah.
But yeah, you do. Like, I feel like a lot of people, another problem in our world is we don't have enough propaganda in defense of our important values, only propaganda for bad stuff.
Golly, yeah.
So I think a lot of people are like, I'm above having to like have to explain myself when the thing is obvious. It's like, well, if you want to do something new, no. So anyway, that's how it started. I started using metaphors from different fields to try to explain the techniques. Lean manufacturing, by the way, is not my first attempt. It took me several tries to come up with a like what I call a conceptual vocabulary, a set of
Yep.
names and concepts that made sense to people that they would be like, oh, okay, that's why it works, makes sense. And that's where Lean Startup came from. That's why it's called Lean Startup. I was borrowing ideas from lean manufacturing and from a lot of other fields, obviously customer development and design thinking and maneuver warfare, all kinds of fields where people had done the pre-existing work to figure out how to talk about rapid iteration and speed of learning as a competitive advantage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So when I left the company, I was kind of thinking about what was next. And I didn't know this at the time, but a very classic Silicon Valley thing is if you have a positive reputation, especially as a software leader, VCs start calling you and be like, hey, you want to come hang out with me and just chill for a bit? And I was like, why? Like, I don't understand what's going on. In retrospect, of course, it's very obvious that people are like
You're like,
positioning
man,
themselves
you're
as my
shining
next company.
personality. Everybody just wants to hang out with you,
Yeah,
apparently.
it's like, and so they started asking me would I meet with their companies and help them as an advisor. Sure, why not? And I can't explain to you how badly these meetings went. Okay. I would come into these meetings and people would be like, so what's your thing? And I'd be like, yeah, we deploy software 50 times a day on average. And they'd be like, that would never work. I'd be like, okay, cool, man. But I'm just telling you what we did. So it worked for us. And they'd be like, no, it didn't. And I'm like, okay, um, you called me for this meeting. I'm here as a favor. So if you think I'm crazy, can we just not have the meeting? Honestly, dude, like what? And they would just like, these meetings went so bad. People would raise their voice. People would ask me to leave. It was like one disaster after another. And I was so traumatized that I was like, well, let me write some of these stories down. And then if people ask for a meeting, I can send them the story. And if they think it's bad, then we can skip the meeting. I was like, that's how thoughtful I was being. I was like, I'm just trying to process my trauma about this, what's going on. And so I started to write these blog posts. I was so embarrassed about it that I did it anonymously. My name wasn't even
Wow.
on them. Yeah, that's how countercultural it was. You got to understand that in those days, startup people didn't blog.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is,
Yeah,
this is
the thing you're
pre-Twitter, pre
describing
like
now, people hear it and go, "Wait, well, what were these idiots thinking?" And you're like, "No, no, 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 no. Eric was the proverbial idiot in that room."
I was very much the idiot at this time. Many people who knew me, my mentors and all kinds of people were like, don't do this. You're going to ruin your career. This is a huge mistake.
Wild.
Very different media landscape than today. But I didn't understand that. I was like, whatever, I'm doing it. So I didn't really expect the writing took over my life.
Yeah.
People just gravitated to it in such a profound way. And it gave me the opportunity to start speaking about the topic and traveling and doing all kinds of stuff. And eventually that led to the book and it becoming a bestseller and all the things that happened since. But that's how it began.
Well, I'll tell you, man, it it has freed up as a operator and on the leadership team here at Givington's and being kind of the one of the builders here, it's freed us up. I mean, just the language, the common language, the methodology, the ease to be able to put it into practice, meaning specifically the lean startup, things like minimum viable product. It has
That's
freed
amazing.
up all the tinkerers of the world, the people that go, you know what, like try, fail fast, try again. So it's freed up and honestly championed and empowered a lot of individuals to step into an entrepreneurial journey because of that. Go, wait, oh, I'm not crazy to just try. And also, there's actually methodology to do this at scale, even, which has been super encouraging personally and professionally for me on that side. And honestly, there's been some really fun parallels for me and my wife personally in parenting 4 kids now, 4 kids under 12, navigating how to parent with, how to do something we've never done before. I tell my 13-year-old daughter all the time, "Hey, I've never parented a 13-year-old before, so you're my trial and error. And sorry, and you're welcome, all in the same breath." But so, I mean, you've spent 15 years watching companies or maybe even more now at this point, use the lean startup method. But then you wrote, you know, you're coming out with a new book, and there clearly something has happened. You've been seeing something happen to where you've been consulting, advising, and working alongside these companies for 15 years, but you're seeing something happen in those companies to where you felt a need to write a book, maybe not necessarily as connected to the lean startup, but actually something around what is corrupting companies themselves. Your new book coming out in May is called Incorruptible, and would love to hear why, what was the reason that you felt the overwhelming need to not continue to pursue, maybe go deeper into the lean startup world and that methodology, but almost you're writing a Dante's Inferno type book saying, hey, you're waving a red flag going, we better be careful with some pretty provocative claims in the book itself. Why this book? Why now?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. I did do the deep lean startup thing. So just to be clear, like 'cause I've had a
Yeah,
lot,
yeah,
been very busy these 15. No, I mean because I but
fair.
and I but although I've written extensions of lean startup, and of course, lean startup spawned 100 books. I mean, there's a whole series with O'Reilly. You got the Leader's
Here's
Guide
two of
right
them. Yeah,
there.
here's two of them right here. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. By the way, which you can only get at Givington's. That you have the last,
that's
the
right.
only
Yes, come
copy.
on. Whoa, wait. Oh, no, wait. There you go.
Yeah, I'm just saying. But a lot of people have written about lean startup applied to this domain, that domain, that domain. Yeah, a lot of people expected that I would spend my whole career as a lean startup consultant and I never need to do anything else again. But I'm not really wired that way. I like to do different things and to learn new things. And although I'm very proud of all the work that we've done in the lean startup movement and really in the startup movement more broadly, and I've helped so many people create so many companies. I mean, I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of their success even more than my own. And yet I've also been witness to a darkness in this business. There's a dark underside to it. And there's so many people who frankly just they lose control of their organization, either because it gets forcibly taken away from them or because it becomes something that they hate and can't control. Like that is happening all over the place. And I just at a certain point I went through this process of helping company after company after company. I tell the story in the book of someone I euphemistically called the professor because I decided I should protect his identity. Although he gave
Redacted
me
name. Yeah, yeah,
he
yeah.
gave he did give me permission to tell the story.
Cool.
He was, a university professor, a tenure professor, but building a startup. And the startup was just so dangerous. Technology was something with tremendous promise, but also like scared the living daylights out of everyone who heard about it. And he was trying to convince employees to join him. And employees would be like, how can I be sure that you won't do something evil with the work that I help you create? Like, but I have such good intentions. They're like, yeah, but you're going to be a for-profit company, right? You're going to have investors, right? What if they fire you? Then what? What if they insist that we do something? And so like they were like very worried about it. And at the same time, I was like, he was like just beginning his journey at the exact same moment that another friend of mine was ending his entrepreneurial journey. He had built this huge company and taken it public, made so much money for his investors. I mean, unbelievable amounts of money for his investors. And at the first opportunity, they had ousted him from the company because the stock price, although it was high, was not high enough. And I was going to this party for him, like it was almost like a wake where we're like celebrating what he had created, but also mourning what had been lost. And when I would tell people the story, I remember in early drafts of the book, I would have people read it and they read the story and they were very confused. They'd be like, I'm sorry, did somebody die? I'm like, no, no, he's not dead. They're like, okay, did the company go out of business?
No.
Nope, company's doing fine. They'd be like, so what are we mourning exactly? And I'm like, that's the problem. We in the building couldn't even figure out what we were mourning because we had this kind of sense that this is not how business is supposed to be. And, this company was one that we really trusted. And now that we knew that it could be decapitated at will, how could we trust anything that anybody who works there says? They could be removed. So I was like trying to explain this to this guy just starting out his journey. I was like, listen, you're going to wind up like this guy. Like
Yeah.
you're already on this path and you'll be rich, but I don't think you'll be very happy. And he was like, okay, well, what do I know? It was like, is there anything I can do about it? Is it possible to build an incorruptible company? And I was like, yes, it is possible, but you're already making mistakes that you're going to come to regret. So it was like, even though you're at the very beginning of your journey, you need to understand how the journey ends in order to make the right initial choices. And so the book became my kind of attempt to document, like, why is this happening? Because this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for hundreds of years where people
Yeah.
create these incredible companies and then watch them be destroyed. Not and I call them unusual failures, not because they got outcompeted in the marketplace, but because their very success made them a target that created a liability that destroyed them. And
You
that
in the book, you
is a
even
huge
say it's
problem.
almost a moral failure. It's not a moral failure, it's almost a more structural one, right? You
Yes,
talk
that's
about that.
exactly right.
It's not necessarily, evil people. Jonathan Haidt, who's one of my favorite authors, wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. How good people come to such different opinions, and see each other as evil, right?
Yeah,
And Jonathan Haidt's brilliant. The way everything he writes is brilliant. But this idea of it, you can do something with good intentions, and yet it's still not just fail. And we also have to define what failure is, and that's why people are going, "Well, wait, what's wrong?" So maybe
yeah,
walk through what you're seeing with these companies, and really just the ethos of business in general in a westernized, very heavy capitalistic marketplace. And I think you use the word enlightened capitalism is kind of what you talk about in the book, of how it's not necessarily moral. It's still ethical, but it's not necessarily connected to someone's intentions, but there's structural issues that lead to this corruptible company. Even when the founder, CEO, owner, primary owner even
yep, yep,
doesn't want it to happen. How
yeah.
does that happen? How is it structural? Maybe give us a little input there.
Yeah, yeah. So the pattern I call enlightened capitalism, following this great book called The Enlightened Capitalist by James O'Toole, which is kind of like a book of scary ghost stories to scare entrepreneurs because it's basically 200 years of the following story. I'll tell the story from the point of view of an entrepreneur named Saul Price. So Saul Price, he was the father of modern retail. Okay, so like in the retail sector, he's an absolute legend, although I don't think he's that widely known outside of retail. He created a company called FedMart. And if you want to get a sense of how incredibly influential FedMart was, the reason why Sam Walton named his company Walmart because he wanted to make an homage to Saul Price. Okay,
Northwest Arkansas, that's where we are. Walmart land,
yeah.
baby.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Walmart is called Walmart because of Saul Price. So Saul had been a lawyer before he became a retailer or an entrepreneur. So he had this idea that as a lawyer, his client, he has what's called a fiduciary duty to his client. And we all want that from our lawyer, right? The lawyer is required to
You
put
better. Yeah.
client's interests ahead of your own. And so when he became a retailer, he said, well, who's my client? This is in the 1950s. The customer is my client. So he built a business on the idea that you have a fiduciary duty to the customer to take care of them. So he was so committed to his the well-being of his customers that, for example, when competitors would try to undercut him on price, like selling a lost leader to get people to go to their store instead of his, he would post their advertisements in his own store and tell everybody, "Listen, don't buy eggs from me; they're cheaper down the street." Okay, because you could not mess with this guy. He had his principles and a sense of like tremendous integrity, and he had a business philosophy. He believed in capped margins. He wouldn't charge too much. He wouldn't raise prices too much. He paid above market wages. He was a really like very ethical person. But more importantly, he wanted to build an organization that had a defined character and ethos, not just his personal views, but the whole organization knew to do the right thing in all circumstances. So the company was a big success. This is the pattern of enlightened capitalism. He rediscovered the same principle that has been discovered many, many times in history, that if you put customers and employees first, if you see shareholders not as your primary fiduciary duty, but as kind of the outcome, the side effect of running a very successful business. If you treat employees well, if you treat your customers well, then it's like a new technology. You simply make a ton more money. You have this unassailable competitive advantage. So he starts taking this company, he took the company public, an IPO, made a bunch of money, everyone got rich. And from the day he took the company public, he had a huge problem, which was that investors were constantly pressuring him to abandon his unique ethos and do more conventional retail stuff. They wanted more short-term growth, short-term profits. They didn't care about being the lowest price. They didn't care about quality. Even to this day, Costco, which is like his, the successor company to FedMart. Quote this in the book. A Deutsche Bank analyst once wrote, as a criticism, by the way, this is a criticism. He says,
Of
Costco
Costco.
Costco takes money that rightfully belongs to shareholders and spends it instead on improving the customer experience, seeing investing in R&D as a form of theft from the rightful owner. This is what prevails as a best practice in our public markets today. It's pretty grim.
Yeah, the man, that is so the primary customer, the the customer is supposed to serve the shareholder almost in
That's right.
this idea. Employees and customers, you know, kiss the ring of the
Yeah.
shareholder is what it almost feels
We
like.
we, the human beings that organizations touch, are the raw material, the soylent green that is produced for the benefit of shareholders. It's quite grim, and I'm not exaggerating. We'll get to, I'm sure, later. Like this is the explicit best practice belief of the whole governance class of our society today. It's very grim. So Saul Price didn't like it, and he was always fighting with his investors, and he couldn't understand, why are investors trying to get me to kill the golden goose? Like, the things they're asking for are self-destructive. Yes, we'll make more money this quarter, but in the long run, customers won't trust us anymore. And he was just ideologically opposed to that. They couldn't convince him. So he decided to take the company private to avoid all this pressure. So he got new investors who were retail experts to buy out all the public investors and take the company private. They owned 51%, he owned 49%. And from the day he took the company private, he had the same problem. 'Cause he still had the same board. The board was still like, "We want more conventional retail. We want faster growth. We want growth for its own sake." So he was battling with the board constantly, and one day in 1975, he comes into work. He's been building this company from nothing for 20 years. He comes into work and the locks on his door have been changed. He doesn't work there anymore. So this is the second part of the golden goose analogy of enlightened capitalism. We keep expecting that the market will reward value creation. And so if someone invents a better way to run business, the market will reward them. But actually, what happens in many cases is their success makes them a target. And the more successful they are, the more valuable their company is for somebody to take over. Now, how did the new owners do? What's their track record? He built this company into a giant success over 20 years. Let's see how the new owners handle it. From 1975 until 1982, pursuing faster growth at all costs, abandoning the ethos that made FedMart successful, they drove it directly into bankruptcy. So they got what they wanted and they destroyed a lot of value along the way. Although, of course, they extracted plenty of money out of the thing on the way down. Meanwhile, so that's the third part of the enlightened capitalism pattern. Investors or sometimes other actors who should have the interests of the company at heart intervene to destroy it in order to capture the success for themselves. So it's actually not about the market rewarding value creation, but rewarding something much, much darker. Now, Saul Price's story has a happy ending, as I kind of spoiled a minute ago. He took 2 weeks after this betrayal. This is like such an entrepreneur. He took 2 weeks off, and then he rented the office upstairs from FedMart and started a
So
new
petty. I love it. So petty.
petty. He was like, he went right back to the same building where he had started the whole thing. And it's funny, that is actually, that itself is a pattern. Like Seth Goldman, who created Honest Tea, told me the same story. When
Really?
when Coca-Cola shut down Honest Tea after
Yeah.
buying it from him, he took I think it was more like a month off, but he took a amount of time off, and then he created Just Iced Tea in the same building where he had originally started Honest Tea, which is like, you got the band back together and be like, screw this,
That's right.
I'm doing it
Uh-huh.
again. And what these
Yeah.
stories, the reason why these guys can do it again, it's not just that they're really charismatic leaders, it's that they understand they have a system that is a repeatable system. They can work. Anyway, so he created something called the Price Club. When I was growing up in San Diego, Price Club was like a local fixture everywhere. Everyone shopped at Price Club.
Yeah, yeah.
His protege, a guy named Jim Sinegal, left Price Club to start Costco. And eventually Costco and Price Club merged. So the company you now call Costco is actually the merger of the original Costco and the original Price Club. So Saul Price's ethos lives on in Costco to this day, powering a $400 billion public company. Meanwhile, FedMart is a historical footnote for business nerds who like to geek out on the history of retail, but otherwise it's completely unknown. And this is the pattern. If we don't understand the ethos of a company, if we don't understand the power of trustworthiness, all we can ever do is extract and destroy. And that is this force which is destroying so many organizations, not just companies, by the way. This has metastasized way out of the for-profit sector and is affecting, because we financialized everything. So you see this in hospitals, you see it in political parties, you see it in journalism, you see it in sports teams, for God's sake. All of a sudden, we have entered a world where we just can't even conceive of any other way of doing business.
You know, it has been a human problem since the dawn of time. It's just interesting how it shows up in Western capitalism. I think about, in early in the Middle East, back when, when Israel was building. I come from a more of a biblical worldview, and there's just so many principles in there of when Israel was shaping itself to be a kingdom, the Bible talks about how it's supposed to be, that Israel should be a kingdom of priests and serve other nations. That's the primary purpose. And watching the shaping of them wanting to consume other nations, just like all other empires. You see empires built by great leaders by serving, right? That upside down leadership ideal. And you'd think the human nature we would learn, but it just shows like we are a dog going back to the vomit so many times.
So many
And you
times.
see
Yeah, you
that
see and how many empires in history, that let
every
alone companies and everything, fail the test of succession.
yeah, gosh,
Even the lucky founders who managed to build a company in this hostile environment and keep it preserved still very often fail to create a transition. And I think the reason is because goes back to what you very smartly asked before. Seeing if you fail to see this as a systemic problem, you don't reach for systemic solutions. Part of the reason why Costco is such an outlier in the modern economy is that it's been able to survive multiple CEO successions. I think they're on their fourth now. Even though the ethos is not baked into an individual person serving as what I call the mission guardian. Instead, the protection is structural, embedded into the way the company is built and governed. And the sad, I think actually shocking truth is that most of today's best practices about how companies should be built, run, and governed are actually value destroying. We have exalted extraction over value creation in a systematic way. And so we who build organizations, who lead them, who buy from them, who work for them, who are on their boards, their middle managers, their customers, it doesn't matter what our role is, investors, board members, middle managers, customers alike, we all have to get together and say, enough with this. We are not going to give obeisance to these best practices because they don't make sense. And we're going to insist on the development of new practices that can help us create organizations that are genuinely committed to human flourishing. And although
jeez,
that sounds very difficult, I know,
yeah.
the good news is we have the case studies, we have the academic research, we have the tools that are needed to demonstrate that there is a better way.
Yeah. And in both on a structural systemic side, yes, there is. And also I think, we can get really bleak and only see the negatives and there's only the shining pieces on the Costco side. But also from a humanity standpoint, like it's, we are wired to do this as well. Culture just tells us that extraction or consumption is the way. And so actually we as humans are made to flourish in this same type of environment that you're describing of not one of consumption, but value creation for the good of the other. And when it is for the good of the other, we actually flourish as well. So it is both systemic and also on the negative side, but on the positive side, although our human nature has two sides to it. Personally, this is thus think with Garrett, not thus say with anybody else. That we have this flesh, this selfishness, but we also have this innate experience and desire to help and serve others. When we do that, we actually flourish too. But what I love about what you're describing in these companies that are structurally making themselves incorruptible is it actually isn't just self sacrifice. It actually serves the entity and produces the very monetary value that these shareholders are chasing everything else. It's actually when you run this model, it doesn't
Yes.
just create a nonprofit that makes everybody feel good, but you don't make money. No, actually, two things can be true. And actually, the better way is when both sit together, which I love that you kind of walk through this idea. You don't just, you don't just burn it down for the sake of destroying it. You actually are deconstructing the way we do it to hopefully reconstruct a new
Yes.
way in this book of Incorruptible. So let's not be bleak anymore. Give us maybe I mean, you've described Costco. There are plenty of other entities out there, both small and big. I mean, I think of my favorite beer is 1554 made by New Belgium. I think New Belgium is a great example of a brewery that has really fought against this
Yeah.
ideal, and I think that they are, although no one is completely perfect, I believe they've done a great job at that. So maybe let's move past Costco, but maybe give some the principles of if a founder is listening to this, or a CEO, or someone is building something, what do they need to be putting in place or be aware of so that they can start building a company, a business structurally. It's not just getting good people or kind people. Yeah, that's great.
I
That's
won't do
great.
it.
But what are the structures that need to get put in place to make this happen?
Oh, excuse
Bless
me.
you.
Okay. So to answer the question, we have to, I'll give an overview, but I want to really caution that this is something you don't just like do casually. Like there's a lot of detail to this. Okay.
Not a
So
one-day strategy session
yeah,
and
this
then
is
we're
not
done.
like, oh, I heard it on a podcast where I'm ready to go. Like this takes work, and it's
Yeah,
something to take seriously. It's like if you saw an Olympic athlete and you asked them like, oh, what's the secret to your success? And like, well, I go to the gym every day, I eat really healthy, and
I devote my life to it is the answer.
yeah, and then you're like, okay, but is there like an easier way? Like, like, okay, that sounds good, but like, or like people will be like, oh, that sounds really hard. Yeah, I get what once I'm an Olympic athlete, I got to go to the gym every day and eat healthy. But in the book, but what can I do in the meantime? I'm just going to go to McDonald's. It's like, no, no, it's the same thing. You got to do it if you want to get there. People like look at these business successes for the ages. That's the equivalent of being an Olympic athlete
Come on, yeah.
in an organization design. Like these are extremely, extremely successful outcomes, but you got to be willing to do the work to get there. So broadly speaking, the blueprint for how to do this requires two dimensions. The first is what I call the path of ethos. This is what Saul Price thing, that you have to be willing to put a philosophy in place that every person in the organization, everyone the organization touches is aligned around a sense of common purpose. And the common purpose has to be to accomplish some specific thing. If you make the exhaust coming out of the engine the purpose of the engine, you're going to choke on your own fumes. Instead, we have to say, look, this is what the company exists to do. Now, Saul Price was willing to say, I'm a fiduciary to the customer. Johnson & Johnson had their famous Our Credo that said, no, we're actually about patients and then doctors and nurses and then communities. Always shareholders last. Shareholders are the outcome. Who are we willing? So I always ask people, think about who you would rather die than betray. That's who you have a fiduciary commitment to. And then we build an operating system, a management system, a cultural system around that commitment. And there's a bunch of techniques in the book about exactly how you do that. The second thing, though, this is what Saul Price got wrong at FedMart and what Jim Sinegal got right at Costco. We have to have what I call the path of integrity. So when people hear the word integrity, it conjures up two things in their mind. One is if you have a high integrity friend, you know they will keep their promise, right? You know, if
Oh,
I
yeah,
can summon that person in your mind. If that person
immediately.
says, I'll be there at 2:15,
They're
are they
there.
gonna be there at 2:30? No.
No, absolutely, yeah.
If they're not sure if they can get there at 2:15, are they gonna tell you they'll be at 2:30? No. Right? They're gonna make a promise, they're gonna keep it. That's what integrity means for a person. But it also has the connotation of structural integrity. If you see a bridge collapse and you go to an engineer and say, hey, why did that bridge collapse? If they're like, well, gravity, that's not a very good engineer. You're like, what? Well, first, yeah, I mean, yes, technically that is true, but
Yeah.
like the other bridge, it didn't collapse and there's still gravity. In fact, this bridge, there was gravity yesterday. Why did it collapse today, right? To understand why a bridge collapses, we have to understand what compromised its structural integrity. Was it properly designed for the circumstances it finds itself in? So we go inspect. Oh, look at here. All the metal joints are corroded and rusty. There's a corrosion that diminished its structural integrity. That's why it collapsed. But look, this other bridge over here is built with stainless steel and there's no rust to be found. Maybe we should build with stainless steel instead of this garbage. So we study organizations to see what makes them strong. Because for an organization, the two aspects of integrity are actually the same. Only an organization that is structurally strong is capable of making and keeping a promise. People always say that consistency is the key to trustworthiness, and that is not correct. Because if you've ever had a friend or loved one fall to the scourge of drug addiction, that person is very consistent. We know exactly what they're going to do. What they're going to do is stab you in the back for a fix. Modern organizations built according to modern best practices are literally addicts. They are addicts. They like think about the social media companies that are like desperate for every click, every bit of advertising they can cram down your throat, desperate to see the stock price go up. Just even though the people that run them are well intentioned, even though the people that run them are richer than you could ever need to be, they still are desperately trying to get the stock price to go up. They are addicts making other addicts. They're pathetic. So if you want to build an organization that people can trust, it's not enough to just be consistent. You have to be consistent in defense of values that people can resonate with. And that's why I'm glad you talked about that universal instinct we all share. This is a piece of ancient wisdom going back in religious and secular traditions, thousands of years. There are better and worse ways of making money. And the good one is where we create new value in the world and we capture some of it for ourselves. So in order to do that, in order to be trustworthy, we have to be able to resist outside pressure. Right. So when FedMart's investors insisted it change direction, they won and the ethos lost. That's what happened at Johnson and Johnson. That's what happened at Boeing. That would happen at Whole Foods. I could tell you story after
Oh
story
my
after
gosh.
story of
Toys R
companies
Us
falling
is
to this
another
corruption.
gosh, yeah.
So many of these companies just absolutely collapse. Whereas Costco, Patagonia, Novo Nordisk, IKEA, Hershey chocolate for that
Yeah.
matter, have been able to resist, not because the people who run them are better or smarter, although I'm sure they're lovely, but because they are built to a stronger blueprint. And here's the problem. Every one of those outlier companies, Costco, every single one I just mentioned, violates almost every best practice of modern governance. So if you want to follow this path, you will have to contend with just an unbelievable number of people telling you that it's foolish, it's pointless, it doesn't make sense, it's not the best practice, it's not good enough. So yeah, it's that is the world we live in the era of what's called shareholder primacy. And of course, part of my goal in writing this book is to break the normative consensus that this is how business should be done. But I promised in the opening chapters of the book that every single technique in this book is something that you can adopt today. You don't have to wait for some regulatory change. You don't have to say like after the revolution, after a global treaty, after no, no, no. These are all techniques that real companies are using right this minute to thrive in spite of these pressures.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's and that shareholder primacy, it's not just bad ethics, it's bad capitalism, actually.
Mhm.
Is it does not produce the very result that even the shareholders are chasing themselves at a longevity standpoint, and the data shows that with just the examples of those companies on that side. But Eric, man, what I love about just your perspective with lean startup, with just the way, honestly, it's just the way you view the world, man. It's really clear that you've done an unbelievable job of connecting the humanity of people to the structures that humans lead, drive, and move forward. That's what makes this content so sticky and valuable because it can be used in a boardroom, building governance and structure, and it can be used literally at the dinner table with me and my wife and my 4 children.
I
Think
know.
about, we have our family values that we have in our house, and we use them to discipline our kids with and encourage and speak life to our kids with, and they're a lifeblood, and it's not just values for the sake of values. There's things that we won't compromise. So it's really fun to see when someone unlocks the humanity around things like capitalism and structural things and governance. It helps, one, make it real, two, gets it to the ground, and three, actually produces results that connect dollars and humanity, which are conversations that are worthwhile. So you are doing some really really cool work. I do appreciate it personally, professionally. Givington's as a whole has benefited from it professionally. I have
No, thank
gotten
you for saying.
the gift of being able to skim through. I haven't finished the book, but I clearly have read enough to be able to have a conversation with you, but I will finish it. Well, I want to give you 30 seconds as we wrap up and end here. Who is this book for and why should they buy it? Who is this book
Okay.
for? Or why should they read it? Why do they need it?
Yeah, there are actually 2 different readers for this book. I know from having done the test reading and experimenting with the book. I don't.
Shocker. You tested and
Yeah,
tested
when
and
you yeah,
tested.
I had more than 600 test readers generate more than 10,000
Oh
comments.
no.
Yeah, I took this really seriously. Listen, I really wanted this book to be good. So there's 2 different readers. There's what I call the why readers and what I call the how readers. And
Yeah.
there's obviously some overlap. It's like more like a Venn diagram, but this and that they're right there in the subtitle. Why this happens and how we're gonna do something about it. And so for the how readers first, I mean, that really is founders, leaders, board members, investors. Okay. If you have influence over an organization that you hold dear and you don't want this to happen, you need to get to work. Because people always ask me, like, when is the best time to do these protections? Well, it's like that old proverb about planting a tree. The best time to plant a tree is 40 years ago. The next best time is right the F now. And I can't tell you how many companies I have worked with where they're like being told by their advisors and investors and lawyers and everybody, oh, it's too early to worry about that stuff, pat on the head, whatever, whatever. And I tell a bunch of these stories in the book. And then next thing you know, it is too late and you have lost control. So if you are building something that you don't want to lose control of, this is an urgent book for you, including I think some readers need to skip right to the implementation stuff. You know,
Yep.
like can't
Yeah.
even waste time on the history and how we got there. Like
Nope.
I understand, get right to it and get to work. Some of the techniques in this book are so easy you could do them over the weekend,
Wow.
and others are so hard that it's a lifetime discipline to master. But there's stuff in there for everybody who cares about organizations. But the why readers maybe are not accustomed to reading a business book like this. nonetheless will get a lot out of it. And I know again from having read test readers, one of them actually just sent me a really long, beautiful letter that they wrote, kind of reflecting on the fact that they are so glad that this book exists. And they're a doctor. They're like, don't work in organizations at all, have zero. They're not on any boards. They don't invest in startups. They're completely outside. They're like, I call them a civilian, basically, not in the industry in any way. But to them, being able to understand why are the things I read in the news happening? Why do these companies act this way? Why are the hospitals that I interact with structured the way that they are? Why is it so impossible for me to figure out which products I should buy? And like for my kids, which schools they should go to. And like just they were just like, wow, this seems like a much broader book than just a business book. And I really think that is true. And I hope that those readers will come to the book and realize that if you take these principles, especially the later chapters address this, you'll see when you get to the end. These for in my own life, learning these principles has given me superpowers. Like there's so many stories I could tell about moments where I was able to accomplish change in the world that I never would have imagined, only because I had the insight that these principles have given me. And so that is true for a lot of the people who read this book, including ones who don't know it yet, but are what I call future builders. Saul Price and a lot of the great founders who are in this book, if you read carefully, you will realize that the reason they had so much success is that they came into entrepreneurship with a pre-existing ethos. This was not the first day on the retail floor was not the first time Saul Price had thought about who he's a fiduciary to, right? He came to it with that philosophy already. So a lot of people are going to read this book thinking they're a Y reader. And one day in the future, they're going to be like, oh, actually, I'm in a position of influence. Oh, actually, I have an idea for a company. And because they will have spent time engaging with and preparing with these ideas, not only will it give them superpowers in their daily life, but it may also make them independently wealthy. So, you
God,
never know.
you love the split between the how and the why readers. I think the how it's easy to see the how readers go, "Oh, I need to read this." But I could not agree more. I actually found, at least, I'm halfway through. I actually found that like I'm finding almost more application for the why side of stuff as you're describing for me personally. I feel like I can sit on both sides of that fence. Eric, random question that actually I think is actually extremely interesting. Do you have kids?
Yeah, yeah. I have 3 young kids.
Okay, have you watched the Lego Movie?
Was that, I have not watched the Lego Movie. They're a little young for it still.
Okay, well, I you might need to just watch it by yourself because literally what you're describing just I mean, it's happened multiple times. Oh my gosh, my 9-year-old loves it. He's obsessed with it. We've watched it probably 4 times, and what you're there's some really interesting parallels between what you're describing in Incorruptible and the Lego Movie when it comes to extraction and building, being a builder, so
Oh, great. Oh, yeah. Okay. That
so
definitely
truly,
I would check
go
that.
watch
Well,
the movie and
it's
you're gonna
funny
see a
because
lot of application.
the Lego Corporation also has this unusual structure.
Really?
Right.
I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lego,
Okay.
they are part of what's called the industrial foundation structure, where there's a nonprofit foundation that actually owns.
You're talking about the, yeah, what do you
Yeah,
call you call that in the
corporate
book?
the
Spiritual holding
spiritual holding
company?
company. Yeah, yeah. Lego's one
Yes.
of those companies. So yeah,
Yes,
maybe
awesome.
they've grappled with these issues themselves.
Maybe.
Interesting.
Well,
Okay, well, I have to see how it comes through in the movie.
the movie 100%,
That's great.
is
That's great.
nudging towards that the whole time, but Eric, man, brother, this is so fun to get to chat with someone that I've been reading and literally, your work has impacted this business in a way from the lean startup side, the Incorruptible side. I think our leadership team and our primary owner embodies this, just he oozes this naturally. It's just super encouraging for us. And again, we're a peon in the world. We're an 18 to $20 million entity. So, but we get to navigate it the way we want. But it's encouraging to see someone speaking at the level you're speaking at, with the authority you're speaking at, to a stuff that actually produces flourishing both on the human side and the structural business side for the right kind of capitalism, which is the way I would phrase it personally. So, Eric, we are so thankful for the time. Love serving you at Givington's, and are thankful for the fact that you're continuing to produce stuff. So, guys, check out Incorruptible, coming out in May with Eric, and he's partnered with some of our friends over at Authors Equity. So, Eric, thanks so much for being down to chat
Thank you
with
so
us
much.
today.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for all the work you do for authors, for
Yeah,
all of that.
brother,
We
absolutely.
really
Thanks for that.
appreciate it.
Talk to you soon.